I'm delighted that I was asked to talk on the book by my good friend Wayne Mueller. I met Wayne many years ago. Was privileged to perform his wedding, and he dedicated this particular book that you've been working with to me several years ago. And I've appreciated Wayne's take on life and spirituality and how do you blend the two of them together. And so I want to read a particular quote that struck me when I taught from this very book many years ago. Wayne said, "The choice we make again and again is this. Will we shape our moments, days, years, inspired by our deepest heart's wisdom and authentic knowing where the thread of sufficiency and grace will lead us? Or shall we be driven today and always by external cultural and organizational requirements, demands, fears, and coercions?" If you, well, you probably haven't, maybe Annie has, attended a class on how I teach this material. And I want you to follow it closely, if you will. Want to look at the clock? I'm supposed, just go, huh? Okay. All right, we'll let it rip. Okay. So, the way that I teach this, and it is according to the science of mind, but it is the gospel according to Bernardo, as Annie pointed out, is the following. As we all know, our life demonstrates according to our level of consciousness. Yes? So in other words, what we think and feel, not just what we think, which is an error that is made by many. And would you folks mind coming over here this way? I keep looking at, I can't see you. Just scoot over. Good kiddos. Good kiddos. I like the, thank you very much. Because I like, otherwise it becomes a monologue, and I like it to be a dialogue. I need to see you, so you can talk to me that way. So it's important that you realize that we're not just talking about the way that we think that creates our consciousness, but it's the way that we think and feel, because it is our passion that actually enacts on our thoughts. Okay? So it isn't just change your thinking and change your life. It's actually change your thinking, follow your passion, and change your life. Okay? Important? Very important message, because if you don't have passion behind your thoughts, it's gonna die in the water. Okay? You got to have passion. And we're going to get to how it is that we get passion. Okay? We're going to get there. So it is consciousness that creates our lives. And we learned that in Science of Mind, and it's a truth that when I first came into these teachings in 1973, well, it's been over 40 years that I've been at it, and you think I'd get it by now, but who gets it by, I'm still struggling with it. And I'll tell you more about that. What I have come to understand is that there are 4 levels of consciousness that we all work with at all times. Okay? That the lowest level of consciousness is that of need. Okay? The lowest level of consciousness that we work with is that of need. What it is that I need in my life. That level of consciousness is absolutely necessary, because that's the level of consciousness that provides survival. If you don't get your needs met, you don't get to survive. It's that simple. Everything from your heart beating, everything from the food that you take in, the shelter over your head, All of that are needs that are important and necessary for you to be here, for you to make a contribution. Unless you meet your needs, you can't make a contribution. Yes? Okay. So let's accept the fact that need, okay, it's a necessary level of consciousness for all of us to know. But here comes the tricky part about that level of consciousness, that it is unconscious most of the time. We go about our needs in an unconscious fashion, and we become susceptible to what Wayne is talking about. Because when we go about fulfilling our needs in an unconscious way, we become victims of what society, family, culture, world events say about who we need to be and how it is that we need to behave. And that's because we go about our needs in an unconscious manner. Everybody following me? Okay? And that's the tricky part. Everything from the beating of my heart to my limbic brain that tells me when to run, the flight, freeze, or what's the other one? Fight. Okay? That's what gets dictated by a very deep part of your brain that is already programmed well before you were born. It's what Ernest Holmes calls global race mind, which I call global mind, and that we are born with. All of our predecessors, our ancestors, program that part of your brain and mind so that we can survive in an unconscious fashion. Imagine what your life would be if you had to think and feel your heart beating every single second. You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. Imagine what it would take for you to think and feel every time you had to breathe your lungs. You couldn't do it. So we already came in the hardware of your existence with some given thoughts and feelings about who you are and how it is that you're to function. But we come in pre-programmed, okay, with the hardware to know what our needs are and to pursue those needs, and unfortunately they're unconscious. Not unfortunately. Fortunately and unfortunately, they're unconscious. Okay? The next level of consciousness, I don't know why that's doing. The next level of consciousness is desire. And it has to do with what it is that you want for your life. And I want you to think about this closely. Because unless you think and you know the difference between your needs and your wants, you will get suckered into what the advertising world is about. Because the way that the advertising world gets your dollar, gets into your pocket, is because they get your wants to look and feel like a need. That unless you buy this product, unless you go into this activity, you will not survive. And they are masters at it. They are masters at convincing us that unless you buy this car, unless you wear this whatever, that you will not survive. And they are excellent at it. And so our whole consumerism society, the whole capitalistic thrust has to do with how to convince us to consume more and more and more and more. And the way that that gets done is by changing our wants into a need. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about our wants, because our wants now have, or ought to have, a higher level of consciousness. And the reason that our wants ought to have a higher level of consciousness is because it's going to require more creativity from you. Our needs are usually pulled out of us out of a requirement to stay alive. Nothing wrong with that. But when we get into our wants, now we have to use our imagination. Now we have to use our passion. Because it comes from a whole different level of consciousness that has to do with how it is that I fulfill my life. How is it that I fulfill my life with what it is that I want rather than what it is that I need? And I'll tell you a very personal story that I'm struggling with right now. And it has to do with my family. How many of you have a perfect family? Where nobody fights, everybody gets along. Every time you get together for a holiday, it's nothing but good time, okay? I got it. Nobody. At least nobody that I know. As a matter of fact, my counseling practice after the holidays doubles. Because everybody went home for the holidays and they all come back a mess. And why is that? Because we usually muscle our way through the holidays and we put up with Uncle Joe drinking too much and, okay. So you know what I'm talking about. And so currently I have a granddaughter who have fixed it upon her mind for reasons that nobody knows to alienate her uncle, my son, from her life. And try as we may for the last 2 years, much to my pain, to see what it is that we need to negotiate for the two of them to reunite, has failed. It has failed. What I want to do, perhaps what I need to do, is strangle her. And that would solve the problem. To just throttle her. Because at her age of being 20-some years old, she thinks she knows all the answers to the world. Like you and I did when we were in our 20s. We knew it all. We knew what we had to do, and the heck with everybody else. And I understand, at my age, being a psychologist, what it is that she's going through. Nevertheless, that doesn't make my passion any less to see my son suffer as he is being alienated. He and his family are being alienated from the rest of the family. And it's very painful. And it breaks my heart. So this last weekend, I went to visit the family because it was my granddaughter's daughter, in other words, my great-grandchild's first birthday. And so I went. I went out of this belief that love conquers all. I went out of the belief, out of the thought and the feeling and the passion that if I can just show up and be loving, that the things will get resolved. And I know that many of you, if perhaps not most of you, have shown up to some circumstance in your life with that same belief. That if you just show up with the best of intent, with an open heart and a kind heart, that things will get resolved. They didn't. They didn't. So now I am left. Now I am left with this huge pain in my heart, knowing that if it continues, the pain is going to continue. The pain is going to continue for me. And I'm trying to reach for something beyond my desire, for something beyond my creativity that is obviously not resolving it for me or for the family. I need to reach something that is beyond me to bring resolution. Are you following that? Because this is very important. Because I know that every single one of you sitting in a chair is probably in a similar situation where you are confronting an issue in your life where you don't know how and when it's going to get resolved. You just don't know. And it is the most difficult part of our personality structure, which is made out of our needs and wants. That's your personality, that's your character, and it's also known as your ego, okay? When your ego confronts something for which you have no solution, and I want to give you a little hint. It's called the spiritual conspiracy. It's a conspiracy designed to have you grow beyond your ego structure. And it is designed all over the world. It's what the Pope, bless his heart, is trying to do. You know, he's trying to push the whole planet beyond the way in which it has functioned up to now. And I understand that I am being pushed beyond that. That the personality, that the ego structure that I have, that all my capacity to coerce, manipulate, scheme around this issue, that all of my wants and desires to try to get my silly granddaughter to behave herself, I can't do it. I just can't do it. So what am I left to do? What I'm left to do is what I call now the third level of consciousness, which has to do with my spiritual practices. And the first and foremost and most important of my spiritual practices is to surrender who I think I am and who I have been up to now. And that, my friends, is the most difficult thing you'll ever do in your life. Because who you think you are, you have built, and rightfully so, with great strength and stamina. And you should be very proud of who you think you are, of who you have brought yourself to be. You should be. And if you're not, call me up and I'll shrink your head. It is important that you take pride in who you think you are. In other words, in how you go about meeting your needs and your desires. You should be proud of that. And you should always have good skills on how to meet your needs and your desires. But you will come, if you haven't yet, I promise you, you will come to that issue that your needs and desires will not meet, will not accomplish. And that is part of the spiritual conspiracy that is going to force you, first and foremost, to surrender who you think you are. And to accept the fact that your needs and desires, all of the creativity that you have and all the passion that you have is going to be insufficient to meet this particular issue in your life. Insufficient. So that's the first level of consciousness, is to realize that. The second, so included in that level of consciousness then comes, how do you go about letting go? How do you go about letting go of who you think you are? And that's where your daily spiritual practices play a part. Your daily spiritual practices of meditation, contemplation, spiritual mind treatment, prayer, service, all of those. that you need to be doing on an ongoing basis in order to build your spiritual muscles, because it is going to take spiritual muscle in order to surrender who you think you are. And your ego cannot provide spiritual muscle. As much as you want it to, it cannot do it. It's impossible, because the ego, your personality, your character that you have so carefully crafted all your years, its role is to help you survive. That's its role. And so why should it surrender itself when its role is to help you survive? To help you keep exactly that character structure that you have so carefully crafted all these years. Who can't do it? So the reason that you're here in this place following this philosophy is to learn how to get beyond that. To learn how to surrender and to be guided through the different practices that you learn through your practitioners, through your ministers, through the classes, through the seminars and conferences, and all those different ways that hopefully give you reminders of what it is that you can do to surrender the way that you have been and gain a whole new way. One of my favorite practices, not easy, but favorite nevertheless, is to take that circumstance, that person, that situation, and surround it in light. And use my imagination to surround and just put light around that situation, that person. So as much as my ego hates it, and believe me, it hates it, I take my granddaughter and I put her there in the light and I surround her with light. Because my ego does not want her to be in the light. But that's where my spiritual muscles has to take her and put her in the light and trust that eventually the light will show the way. Listen to what Wayne says about that. He says, yet there is yet another powerful hindrance on the path to a sufficient life, sufficient being the surrender of our ego structure. Even if we do know in our heart what is true in this moment and have learned to fully trust our intuition and absolutely rely on the accuracy of our inner wisdom in any given situation. I mean, I know what to do about my granddaughter, put her in the light. Knowing the truth is not the same as acting on it. It's not the same as acting on it. So I can know all I want about God taking charge of this situation and blah, 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 blah. The truth is I've got to do something about it. I have to do my meditations. I have to do my contemplations. I have to do my surrendering. That's what's going to get me there, and nothing short of it. Because it is those spiritual practices that eventually will take me and you to what I consider to be the highest level of consciousness, which is our spiritual consciousness, which is your spiritual beingness. And it is your spiritual consciousness that provides the intuitions, that provides the wisdom, that provides the light, that provides grace. Are you familiar with the concept of grace? I'll define it. Grace is the unexpected goodness that evolves out of our willingness to surrender. Because unless I surrender, then I have a fixed expectation on what is going to meet my wants and needs. Follow that? As long as I have a fixed expectation of what's going to get me what I want when I want it, there is no grace. There is no grace. I may get what I need, what I want, when I want it. No problem with that. Many of us settle for that. But trust me, you will effort at it. You will effort at getting what you want when you want it. Because the only way that you will go about it will be through your character and through your personality structure, through your belief systems, and through your physical muscle, not your spiritual muscle. Big difference. Huge difference. Eventually, the goal of all of our lives, the goal of the entire planet, according to the Gospel of Bernardo, is that we all will come to a place of love. That's the goal. So if at any moment, if you are in the same pickle that I am, feeling disconnected from whether it's a loved one or a hated one, I mean, choose your poison. If you are feeling disconnected, you are not in that spiritual reality. You're not in that spiritual reality. Do we have work to do? You bet. We all have work to do. I know that there is a political party that you're not enthralled with. That there is an in-law that you're not enthralled with. That there is a fellow employee or a boss or a whoever, or even a medical diagnosis that you're not enthralled with. I don't care what it is. I guarantee you that somewhere in your personality structure you are disconnected with something in your life, and as long as you're disconnected with that, you're not functioning out of your spiritual consciousness. And I'm going to be real hard on you about that. Real hard on you. Because if that's where we're headed, I'm telling you, get to work. Get to work. Identify it. Identify what it is. Identify it as a need or as a desire. Make sure that you make it real clear, as Dr. Holmes encouraged us to do. Get clear what it is that needs to be treated for, that needs to be prayed for, and that eventually needs to be surrendered. Because the only solution that will be permanent, not only in your life, but in the life of your children and your grandchildren and all of our generations to come, is for us to find a way to surrender who we think we are and come into who we really are. God bless you.